Hello, my name is Norman Valdez, and I welcome you to another episode of the BrainTrainr AI for Social Impact podcast. In this episode, we're excited to feature Riz Vazir, a seasoned tech and healthcare consultant and the founder of Scroll by Choice. Riz is on a mission to help people thrive along technology without letting it take over their lives. Join us as we explore the impact of artificial intelligence on education, mental health, and how can we maintain a human-centered approach in an increasingly digital world. Let's right into this insightful conversation. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the BrainTrainr podcast AI for Social Impact. And today we have guest Riz Vazir. I'm gonna let Alex kick us off.
So, welcome, Riz. It's really a pleasure to have you on the podcast. When we start having conversations with people who are coming into the space from different angles, I'm always just interested in what made you come into the space. Like, what inspired you to found Scroll by Choice?
Yeah, it's Alex. It's a good origin story to share. Been in consulting, customer facing world for nearly all my career, which is now over 20 plus years. So I was one of those guys that would roll out of bed and look at email, and that gap was maybe about 4 seconds between the time I rolled out of bed and looked at email. And it wasn't an odd thing to do. It was just what you did in that work setting. And what I was starting to notice is that I was always connected. So it's not just right out of bed. It's while I was brushing my teeth. It's while I was eating breakfast. It's while I got our son ready out for school, and so on and so forth. And all of this extreme connectedness, if you might, and to work, not to social media or anything else, just to, good old work, was getting me into that position of, feeling like I'm always firefighting or anticipating a firefight. Because, let's face it, when you run a global team, when you are customer facing, there's always an emergency to go after, right? So that's one thing that was sort of happening in our lives. The other thing is our son had just started to use technology in kindergarten, much sooner than we had anticipated he would, because the pandemic thrust that upon a lot of kids. School was digital, and so he sat in front of a laptop all day. And that by itself wasn't a bad thing, but a lot of the quote unquote ed tech tools that he was using were just some sort of variation of Candy Crush. It was like a digital game that he just could not pull himself away from. And so now he's sitting there as a kindergartner, as a first grader, just glued to his laptop. And I wanted to have that conversation with him without making it feel that technology is a bad thing, because technology is not a bad thing generally. I didn't want him to sort of frame technology as if it's an adversary or something that he must hide from me because he's using it. So those were two things that were going on simultaneously in my life. And I was like, okay, I got to go find a solution for this, for myself, for my family. And so when I went out to look in the market, everything was around timers and locks and restrictions that I could apply as a parent, as an individual. And look, I don't like restrictions. I've struggled with weight, for example, for all my life. I've been on many a diet where you stop eating sugar for some days, stop eating carbs for some days, and then you come right back into eating that and eating more of it. So I don't love the idea of restrictions. They create yo-yo situations. And so that was it. That was like, I'm going to go form Scroll by Choice. I'm going to find a way that we can actually live healthy, thriving lives with smart digital technology still part of our lives rather than pushing it away.
Yeah, and I remember like when we had a little conversation before, very much like that aspect, and I'm gonna just bring it up right now, and that is that not to date ourselves, but I think all of us here have a recollection of how things were when we didn't have powerful iPhone in our pockets and high-speed internet connections. It's basically all of these technologies that let's call it like generations of today, younger generations of today, just grew up right from the get-go, as opposed to us when we still maybe had an element of offline time and offline activities that was actually kind of still normal, but now maybe less so. Can you speak a little bit about? I know you're very passionate about that as well, about that maybe the responsibility that those of us who had the pleasure to see those two worlds, and then what is it that we can do, or what is it that you're doing, or tell us about that.
No, we certainly, it is dating ourselves, right? To say, look, we lived in a pre-internet era, and for those that have lived in the pre-internet era, there is a certain privilege to reminiscing about the times before, right? We imagine how good it was when you sat around with friends and were basically present there and didn't have any distractions, right? So nostalgia tends to rub off all the bad stuff and only keeps the shiny stuff in our minds, right? That's what the purpose nostalgia serves. And there is some truth to that, and there is a lot of value in that wisdom of presence, of planning. There's lots of good skills that we had as part of the pre-internet era. What we also fell for as members of that generation is when we were starting to get introduced to digital technology, we sort of saw it as our analog lives just ported into our digital lives, right? So we said, hey, I hang out with friends in real life. I just need all my friends on a chat, and it's going to be the same. It's going to be the same, just in a digital format. So that's why we flocked to things like Facebook at the time, or MySpace, or whatever it is that was your first social media platform. I think the naivety that we had as a generation is we didn't understand that there were business models that were guiding this digital transition as well. Nothing comes for free, right? All of these things were free. And so that was, I think, a naivety on part of our generation to say, hey, we're going on these platforms, which are really sophisticated. They're on my phone. They're really smart. And I'm not paying a thing for it. But is it the same as that, group of friends gathering around the campfire? And it's not, right? Now you have a platform or set of platforms that monetize your attention, that are there to listen into your conversations, and they're there to serve you ads, for example, as a result of that, right? That's the business that they've created. I think that was the naivety in our generation. Now, I think the part that we can learn from that as this generation looking ahead, helping the current generation grapple with artificial intelligence, for example, which is the next frontier of technology innovation, is to not be naive, right? So today, everyone loves the tech, right? We're all talking about the technology. We're using terms like GPT. I mean, that's a highly technical term that's landed into the local vocabulary of people. We're even talking version numbers, right? People are talking like version 3.5. Like, when's the last time that happened? Windows, maybe? And so that vocabulary is very technical currently, but it is hiding the fact that there is going to be a business model wrapped around this stuff, right? This insight is not going to come to you for free. This attention is not going to come to you for free. And so that's the responsibility that we as the generation have to learn from the past of social media and say, we're not going to fall prey to the same trick again. Because if we do, then we really haven't served ourselves or our current generation.
I remember the Pentium. I don't know if you were following it, processors. When I was putting up my own computers, I was like, following out the processor, Pentium 1, 2, 3, 4. That's right.
That was the domain of technical people, right? That felt like the domain of technical people, and you wore it as a badge of honor. Like, it was a completely fair thing to do. You knew that you were going to be tagged as a nerd or whatever, and that's okay. Like, you carried that, and that's what you wore as a matter of pride. Now, that's society at large, right? People are saying, I'm paying for GPT-4 or Claude something or Gemini something. And again, they're sticking with the technology without sort of paying attention to the business.
They're talking to the relationship with technology with the son. That technology is not inherently bad or evil. It's a tool. And we talk about a lot of the same things, that technology is a mirror. Like, it's a reflection of who's developing it, who's deploying it. And a lot of the work that we're doing is around understanding the fact that what you talked about now is that there's underlying business models, there's underlying rationale, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. Understanding that we need diverse voices, especially when we're looking at AI development deployment, is really important. When you've obviously have a lot of expertise with social media, society, education, as a society, we weren't mature enough to handle social media. You can look at Cambridge Analytica and what it's doing for challenges for democracy and so forth. Do you think that we're mature enough to handle AI when it comes into basically social media on steroids, when it's shaped by the very few?
So I tend to be an optimist, Alex, in my point of view, right? I think humans are resilient, which is why I invest in humans, which is why we put all our chips on our people. But to your question of are we mature enough to handle artificial intelligence, I think we are starting to have more relevant conversations at the frontier of AI that we weren't even having at the beginning of social media. Today, legislation is not an afterthought. For example, in the Senate recently, at least in the US Senate, there were laws that were just passed that could sort of help shape how data privacy laws come around. It's called COSPA. And it still has a long way to go in terms of passing in the US House and becoming law. Now that's the scenario where we're creating law about something that got created 25 years ago now. On the other hand, with artificial intelligence, that conversation is already underway, right? So we don't have laws guiding it. We don't even have the ethical frameworks guiding it yet. But at least there is an interest because there are some fingers burned from social media where we're like, we don't want to do that again. We don't want to necessarily put our societies at risk as much. So I don't think we have solutions yet, but at least there is an express intention to try and make a better scenario. Now, the question that we don't know and we can all sort of hypothesize is the tech is moving extremely rapidly, right? Extremely fast. And for a legislator to catch up to that technology is not a real expectation as a citizen that I have, because that governments are slow and they need to be deliberate and they need to be thinking about all of the different perspectives and gathering, to your point, the diverse voices along the way in shaping those perspectives. So that work is going to be slow and deliberate. Technology, on the other hand, is going to be a bullet that just runs very fast, right? So we're going to need more than just reliance on legislators to try and help with this maturity curve. We're going to need responsible artificial intelligence deployment teams within employers, within companies, within homes, within schools, wherever it is that we are expected to adopt this latest technology, we will need sort of a decentralized model guided by common ethical frameworks in order to adopt these things in a rational way. If we don't have these individuals or teams sort of present, the tech and the business model that follows behind it is going to basically level set whatever it comes across.
Yeah, and just kind of connecting the dots here with something you said about when you were talking about your experience and your kid dealing with an ed tech technology that kind of looks like Candy Crush. The way I see things today is like I think there's an agreement that this AI thing is like it kind of got a different animal altogether. It has the potential for a lot of good things, but also like when it comes to the educational space, or at least the level of engagement that it will produce, that it's producing, right? When you have some app that I'm not sure you're familiar with, there's an app called Character.ai that allows people to create characters. You can talk to Super Mario, you can talk to Albert Einstein. And, these are the kinds of things that I think beyond just a game that can be very addictive when you have something that actually functions or responds as another person. Who's to say that, depending on how kids have different needs and social needs and other things, that they're just probably likely will have the potential to actually be more engaged and quote unquote maybe even addicted to these kinds of things that are just popping up. So how do you can you comment about, like, in terms of AI and mental health in general, has the potential to help youth maybe with dealing with anxiety, with other things like that, a 24/7 person, in quotes, person that you can talk to, but at the same time you have the other side, which is like the addictiveness, the level of engagement, and if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, no, I have perspectives, I have opinions. I don't know if there's an answer behind any of these opinions, Norman, which is the trajectory at which the technology is developing, whether it's Character.ai or some other video-based morphing tool or whatnot. The trajectory is for artificial intelligence, particularly generative artificial intelligence, to become more personalized and to become smarter and intimate, right? That's the direction it's going to go to. It's very explicitly there to learn as much about you as there is possible to know, right? I mean, the digital twin sort of is the way that people talk about artificial intelligence. So it's basically you in a digital format in some sense. And that is the trajectory of the technology. That's not going to change. It perhaps shouldn't change either, because there's a lot of value to be gained from personalized insights, right? Personalized medicine, personalized therapy, personalized education. Those are all positive outcomes from something that is built for me in my use case, in my scenario. That's a good stuff. Now, you talked about engagement, which is, again, if you grow in a group of product managers, that's kind of their code of saying how often are people using this stuff, right? And are they using it enough? And it is, when we live in a world where knowledge or information is the currency, we're going to be constantly digging for more and more and so, if you are an information worker, and many of us are, having the answer, the right answer is what rewards you, right? So you want to search for that right answer, and these artificial intelligence will open up deep tunnels for you to sort of step into. Now, you talked about mental health and having someone present all the time to talk with. If you speak to therapists, and we do in our world, they tell us that the first set of work that needs to happen alongside patients, and then throughout the remainder of the journey, is trust build. There's a lot of work that a therapist has to go through to build trust, and we also intuitively understand that, because let's say you and I were friends, and if I was about to share a secret with you, I have to be sure that you are trustworthy for me to share this secret with you, that you're not going to just go tell Alex later on and say, hey, this is what Riz said. Or in some instances, I kind of want you to do that, but I don't have the guts to tell Alex. I want you to go tell Alex to do that, right? So those are very complex, nuanced things that we've learned over millennia of humanity, right? Those are the things that are coded into our genes. Now, so when you just say, hey, there's a device that can be always present to you, that device is extremely patient. The device isn't going to go talk to anyone else about you, ideally. And so while you get a lot of input and information exchange, what you don't gain is this ability to gauge whether you can trust someone, or gauge whether you can actually rely on someone. So you don't really learn the relationship part of it. You just get the academic exchange of information. And so that's where I feel the danger is, that if we over rely on just information exchange, like if a mental health app were just simply to tell me what's wrong with me, versus me learning that through a human exchange, I think there is a difference in how valuable that is to me. And so that's where I would leave it, to say there's a lot of value in personalization, but there's some things lost in the fact that we don't learn certain skills when we just rely on information.
I want to come back to what you said earlier, but related back to what you just said now. You said that we're starting to have the right conversation. Legislation is being pushed along because of the reality that AI is presenting in front of us. As it relates to education, when we're faced with that, we're in the other side of my work, really looking at how do we rethink education to move from focusing on what to learn towards how to learn, because AI is shifting labor markets, and then in there's a huge mental health and anxiety for youth involved as well. But how do you think this is actually an opportunity for us to really move towards learning how to think critically, fostering curiosity, creativity, and therefore this whole shift, while it will have disruption, will actually force us to better our society in ways that can help us deal with social media, can help us deal with AI, and actually leverage it as a tool to personalize education that could be a helpful tool when we're looking at the need for different types of learning and so forth?
Yeah, no, this is a really good question, and one that I'm sure lots of people are thinking about today. I know for a fact that administrators and superintendents and others are thinking deeply about, the role of artificial intelligence in AI. Here's how I think about it, which is, usually in my mind, I like to work backwards from the outcome, right? So let's pretend that the goal of education is for the individual to go find gainful employment. Let's pretend that is one of the roles that education serves, right? And so today, our education system serves as effectively a factory producing capable candidates that have certain knowledge sets in them. And I'm talking about education, not just primary education. I'm talking about education broadly. It develops a certain set of knowledge-based skills, some practical skills, not as much. And then you take that into an employer and say, hey, here's all the things that I bring to you. And is this valuable to your efforts and making profits in the world or driving impact in the world? And if there's a good match, you get gainful employment. Now, if you think about what's changing in the employer world, and I'll get back to the education world as a result. Today, as an employee, maybe 5 years ago as an employee, the knowledge you had in your head plus the knowledge that you had the potential to acquire represented a large part of the value that you brought to the employer. Hey, I'm a research scientist. I have a certain set of information in my head, and I have the ability to absorb more relevant information. That's a large part of the value that you brought to the employer. The other part of the value that you brought to the employer was how you could take all that knowledge and apply it in the context of that work. So I always give this analogy saying if I hire a product manager at $150,000, I expect that the product manager will be able to apply the knowledge that they bring in their head and bring a return of at least 4 to 7 times more, right? So that's the goal with which I would hire. Now, if you look again, there is an end to this connection to education, which is that knowledge worker in the company has access to nearly infinite amount, right? They have the GPTs deployed within companies. Suddenly, access to information in your head is not as valuable because that information is now codified in the local GPTs. And so that's no longer such a cool thing to bring into the employment space because what you know is already known by most, and it's easily accessible. It's not even hidden anymore. You can just type a question and get an answer to that stuff, right? So it's not just that. So now you're going to have to tell a story that says, I can apply the knowledge that is available in a very unique way, an application of knowledge. Think about how does knowledge get applied in a context of a workplace? You go into a budget meeting and ask for budget for something, right? That's an application scenario. You're going to build trust with your leadership team. You're going to tell stories in order to sort of convince others. You're going to negotiate an outcome. That's how you apply the knowledge that's in your head. If you are a person who can do those things uniquely different than the next person that walks in the door, that's your differentiator. So now, if that's how the workplace is changing, you got to back up and say, okay, how should educational systems be changing? Because now it's no longer about, did you pass a particular test and did you know this particular piece of information? It's frankly irrelevant. Sure, there's certain brain development exercises that you go through when you start to memorize, and there's value in brain development in that aspect. But for all meanings, intents and purposes, the knowledge in your head is stale already. How you apply it. And so schools, as they encounter artificial intelligence, have to think about how do you take the information, the knowledge that is being spouted by these really smart GPTs, and how do you convince a group of people to follow you? How do you convince someone to invest in you? How do you convince someone that you actually have a spine when things go wrong, and when you can you handle failure, resilience? Like, those are the things that will really shine to the top. And I think that's what educational systems need to be sort of optimizing for.
Yeah, I was listening to a good podcast. I wish I remember exactly what it was. I think it was the AI for Kids podcast. And they had an interview two educators. On the one side, you had an educator who was on an extreme side, right? One educator had a course, it was a creative writing course, and she had made the decision as an instructor to completely ban AI from students from using generative AIs, like using ChatGPT to create paragraphs or the entire task of creative work. And then on the other side, you had, again, an instructor who is a creative writing instructor, who actually harnessed AI and said, like, okay, you can actually improve the tone, you can actually come up with different words, you can actually use AI to create an outline, to debate whether or not what you're saying here actually is flowing and giving you ideas, etc. And so it was very interesting contrast to see from my perspective. And then to the person that completely said, okay, this AI is forbidden from my classroom, they asked the questions like, wouldn't you consider that not blocking students from using AI kind of goes against with the reality of the world right now. Because while AI is still new, there's a lot of people in academia, there's people at work who are already using, because if anything, a lot of these things have become more accessible because they're free. All you need is a Google account, Microsoft account to access these things. And people at work, the reality is that people at work are using these things now. So the question to her was like, aren't you picturing by blocking AI a reality that is actually not the case with the quote unquote the real world? And so that makes me think about like just really we are, and I know like as people that have white collar type of jobs are plugged in front of a screen, in front of a device, like from 9 to 5 or whatever the time is, and sometimes longer, right? We work extra hours and whatnot, and we are all looking at our phones, we're looking at devices. So the reality, like, is it like the reality of workforce is that we are actually plugged into the quote unquote the matrix, right? Because we're plugged into these devices, and that's how the world is running right now. So what is your perspective or your consideration? Or I know you deal with these kinds of things maybe when you're doing scroll by choice, disconnecting people. But what is this reality? How do you wrestle with this?
Yeah, no, that's a good term, wrestling, right? Because there is tension here. Digital devices surround us, and whether that's your laptop, whether that's your phone, whether that's your TV, into a digital device, and it's there trying to grab your attention, right? And that's just grabbing your attention always for a negative thing. It's actually grabbing your attention sometimes to help you out, right? It's trying to tell you that it's time to wake up. It's trying to tell you, relax you. Like there is a variety of positive use cases as well around the devices. So again, going back to your teacher example, I have also spoken with many teachers in this scenario who are struggling with AI use or generative AI use in the classroom or not. And for some people, the work of coming up with an essay, the outline, the format, that work is really the more important aspect, right? The resilience that you develop from the frustration of not coming up with an idea and then batting your head over. Like that's growth. It feels very uncomfortable, but that's where the growth is. And a lot of administrators and teachers are saying, this tool is cheating our kids out of that growth. It's not so much about the technology being bad versus technology being good. It's like, hey, now you've created a shortcut where you don't have to grow in that way. And yes, that is a true statement. You don't grow in that way. The same way that you and I no longer grow by pulling water out of a well. We don't. Some generations ago, that's how people grew muscles, maybe. But now you go to the gym if that's what your goal is, to develop muscles, right? So the modality has shifted. And it does not mean that we should go back to pulling water from the well. And so those administrators are reacting with a knee-jerk reaction right now because they don't have an alternative. So they're like, no. This way of growth is the best way. Let's have people write with paper and pen and let them sort of struggle with the idea. I think the better model is to say, okay, the world has changed. Yes, this growth is no longer an opportunity. The shortcut exists. How do we still let them go through the struggle of, coming up with a bad idea and being told that it's a bad idea, or coming up with something from nothing? And we are going to have to stress on those aspects of human growth differently and creatively, sometimes with the use of digital tools, sometimes without the aid of digital tools. Because, again, connecting back into the corporate workplace, anyone who's lived half a day in a job knows that it's never really about the information or the fact. That's just the veneer. Work happens in the folds of the human connection. It happens in the relationship that you establish with your boss. It happens in the way that you gain the trust of your customers. That has got very little to do with facts and very much to do with your ability to build bridges, your credibility in the scenario. And so none of those things currently are being threatened by artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence. So you have a lot of good data, and now you can create a presentation deck at work with the most fantastic images and the most appropriate data points and the best business case. Sure, that's good. That's a shortcut. You've gained some efficiency, but you're still going to have to convince people to invest in you, to trust in you, to follow you. And so that growth has to happen in schools, that growth has to happen at work. And that's why, so at Scroll by Choice, my intention is never to say, hey, if I got you away from screens, I win. No, that's not the goal. My goal is to put you in control. And that's the growth, right? To say, how do you actually get back into the driver's seat versus an algorithm driving you? Because if you're back in the driver's seat, now you can steer the ship however you want to steer it. And the way you want to steer it is watching 4 hours of Netflix, fantastic, no problem. That's your ship to steer, as long as you're steering it.
I love that analogy with steering the ship and really taking back the control, letting it, embracing while understanding the technology. I want to, it's really drawing back to that we're not using AI to think about replacing thinking, it's amplifying thinking and the need to shift that focus. But I want to bring a couple of thematics that we discussed, and we're coming up on time with the next a few questions. But there's a great writing by Sir Jeff Mulligan around the imaginary crisis that relates to, because we're faced with climate change, we're faced with a media that focuses on doom and gloom and like it's here all the time. There's an imaginary crisis that's hampering our ability to see and therefore act towards a beneficial future. That's true for climate change, and his writing, he saw 30 years down the line. It's difficult to see that far ahead. With AI, and especially as you tie into youth's mental health, anxiety, and so forth, that's not any longer 30 years. It's 3 to 5 years, or choose your year. Like it's close now. But if we reshape how we're thinking about it, and again using it to amplify our thinking and escaping that imaginary crisis and actually fostering creativity, curiosity, what ways do you think, especially through your education and becoming aware enough to steer the ship, how can that actually help us escape that imaginary crisis to look at a future that is beneficial in intentional ways?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Alex. In addition to creativity, I think about connection, right? The human connection, where the tool, the artificial intelligence, is going to amplify the jump off point at which you start, right? So where Picasso and Da Vinci may have had this much information to rely upon and they built upon it, we're standing on a much higher pedestal, right? So we can be, and we should use that. I mean, the fact that you and I have more information accessible to us than any generation before that is a privilege, right? It gives you access to sort of leap bounds in unimaginative ways. The part that's important, though, and to your point of the imagined crisis, is that we can't fall prey to saying that is the thing and that is our reality and that is our world. That is not our reality and that is not our world. That is a set of information organized in a way that's intelligent. The world that you live in is still the door that you walk out the door, and the neighbor that you greet, and the street that you walk in, and the schools that you go attend, right? So it's got to be very intentional to say, are we as a society investing in the local connection, in the local community connection? Because really what matters to you today, and this is not to position that climate change is not important, but what matters to you today is the broken street outside your apartment, right? Because that's going to create potholes when it rains. So that local civic responsibility is almost as important or just as important as your responsibility towards climate change, as an example. So I think what we've lost the narrative is, because the data connects us all in a uniquely seamless fashion and the world feels like one, we become overwhelmed by the doom and gloom that shapes the world, because we only look at the doom and gloom that shapes the world. But when you look at the pockets of goodness just around you, I think there's a sense of optimism that you can actually make a change. You can actually do something about it. Climate change may not be a one-man person's initiative, but getting that street repaired, yeah, that could be a letter that you write into your local civic office and get that fixed, right? That puts you in control. I think that is the pivot that we have to help people make, is that there is a lot that you can in fact control. It's not all out of your hands, particularly the youth today, right? Like, the power in the hands of the youth today is unimaginable. But because they're overwhelmed by all of the stuff happening, everywhere that Taylor Swift goes for a concert is not a place that you can influence, and you don't have to. You need to influence your world first, right? Start small. I think that we need to sort of help with that perspective shift along the way.
Yeah, as Alex says, we're coming to a close. But so I'm gonna just sort of pull on your previous experiences, specifically like at Microsoft, where you were working on change management. And a number of the people that listen to us, will listen to us, are in social impact and philanthropy. And so yeah, we're all organizations, but specifically the sector upon which is our audience, is dealing with a big change management of the transformational technology that is artificial intelligence. Anything, I'm sure you've been reflecting on this quite a bit. Anything you can share with them as advice, tip, or a reflection on the change management that is this artificial intelligence?
Yeah, man. I mean, AI is in everyone's workplace, right? Whether you allowed for it or didn't allow for it in the policy, it's there. This past summer, we had thousands of interns join thousands of companies, and they've probably uploaded billions of dollars worth of IP into these chat clouds because they wanted to make a good presentation for their boss. And so that change is here. Your IP has walked out the door, whether you know it or don't know it. And so the change management aspect first, I think, is to get a hold on the data. What data is yours as a company, as an organization? What principles are yours and what are not yours, right? And that's not a line that we've been very clear about. Before artificial intelligence, it was very suitable and convenient for an employer to say, hey, not only is the laptop that I gave you mine, but that phone that you use, I'll put my software on that too, because that way you can be available all the time. And that iPad at home, I'll put software on that too, because then I can govern it too. So the employers were trying to get as much of control as possible on all the digital devices, because that's how they could keep them secure. They could keep them up to date. But now the bigger question that comes out when you look at data underneath it is, if Norman, you and Alex have had a chat, is that chat your employer's data or is that your data? Because if it's your employer's data, they can put a GPT over it and see if Norman was really out on PTO or was he just hanging out with Alex. But if it's your data, then you got to find a way to protect it, right? So change management step 101 here is going to be the clarity of the data on which artificial intelligence will reason. It's going to bring some hard conversations together. We don't actually have those. Lots of companies and smaller companies struggle with this the most. They don't have those lines. It's like, hey, if you're an employee, you work for us all day long. Doesn't matter which digital tool you're on, you're ours. That's different because our AI can scrape all that data. And the question is whether you want your kids' pictures being scraped by your employer's GPT. I would say, no, I don't. Does that mean that I give hand in my phone? Does that mean, and that's the first steps of change management, right? I mean, and the other aspect of change management, the next pillar, is what do people think about it in your organization? Are you touting the efficiency flag to say we're going to become more efficient? Because people hear that and say, okay, that's a layoff. If two people needed to do a job, maybe they're going to have one people do a job. And so you have to be very cautious as an employer, as a leader, when you tout efficiency gains. How does your employee base hear that? How are they listening to this? There's a lot of stuff that's going to change even as a leadership team in a company. Suddenly, AI is very good. Generative AI is very good at finding patterns that get missed easily if you're not looking at them carefully. The McKinsey consultant that you pay the millions of dollars to is probably going to miss those patterns before AI picks it up. And that means you're going to get a lot of volatility. Some people, if you're in the public market, your stock value is going to change dramatically. If you're with a mission-oriented organization, the value of your mission is going to fluctuate. Is it really as important? Is climate change really as important? The newest AI model says we're going to live another 30 years. Okay, fine. Maybe it's not as important, right? So you're constantly battling perceptions. And so it's going to require agility. It's going to require flexibility. It's going to require a lot of clear communication, honest communication. We have a whole breed of leadership that will need to change because our old breed of leadership has relied upon opaque information. For example, salaries. You don't know what people earn in most companies. That served the company's interests, right? That leadership was developed in that mindset. AI is going to make things transparent in a way that we can't even imagine, right? I mean, I can tell, I should be able to tell using my own AI agent who knows exactly what my job is, what someone else is getting paid to do the same job because it has access to all the information available, right? So how does that mean? What does that mean for a boss conversation? So there's a lot of aspects of change that will play out, and I think a new breed of leadership that will need to sort of come sit alongside it.
So I'll finalize with one question, but first, in Norman's defense, he hangs out with me a lot, but we always talk about AI for social impact. So to any funders or anything like that, it's actually true. I was going to ask for you to share deeper dives into thematics that you sit on expertise, but I actually rather will include that in the show notes so you can share it afterwards. But I want you to imagine the ecosystem that we work with is cross-sectoral. It's pretty much the whole ecosystem in Canada looking at AI for social impact. If you had one golden key that you want to deliver to the ecosystem, one intervention, one thing that you think could push us in the right direction, and you've obviously talked a lot about aspects of this now, but what would it be? Like one intervention.
Bet on the human. Like that's where I am. It's not so much an intervention, but it's a framing, because there is a lot of glamour that the current tech has, right? There's a lot of glamour, simplicity, modernity, and there's a big draw. If you're any level in any organization, you are drawn towards it. It feels like if you're not talking artificial intelligence, you are archaic. Like, my goodness, have you even woken up and tested ChatGPT today? Like, what's the latest thing? Like, that is the draw, right? And from boardrooms down to analyst levels, that is the conversation. Schools are funneling certifications after certifications to say you're artificial intelligence savvy. We don't know exactly what that means yet, but now you're certified. And boardrooms are like, well, if it's not generated by AI, then I don't want to talk about it. That's cool, but the human is where you've got to optimize for. So if you do not have a plan for how you are going to amplify on currently human-only traits, then I think that's a net loss. So if I was given just one key, I'd constantly remind the boardroom to say, even with the best information, the most accurate and the most up-to-date information, you're still going to need a set of people who will put the work sometimes above their own individual priorities in order to actually take that information and move it forward. So bet on humanity is sort of where I'm at.
Okay, and with that, I think we're just gonna bring this episode to close. Thank you so much, Riz. It was a very entertaining, a very enlightening conversation. And I'm not just saying that because I'm supposed to say that. I actually do truly mean what I'm saying. And I think like we would like to have you on if possible in the future. And just to close off, is there anything that you would like to say, to share, maybe Scroll by Choice? Actually, or what you're doing with Scroll by Choice, I thought right off the bat when I saw it was so great. Immediately I shared the link with my sister who has 2 kids. I don't know if she signed up or anything, but like I just think this is something that we need. But anyways, anything you want to share before we close off?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think the work that is happening in Canada, the work that's happening across the world, here at home for me in the US, there's a lot of bright ideas, and I really appreciate all levels of organizations leaning into this, right? So the fact that you guys are fellows in this space means a lot, right? Because it furthers the dialogue. For the audience that's going to listen to us, maybe they've listened to us half while they were sort of driving or walking their dog. But these are all important nuggets of information to land on people over a period of time before which they'll be ready for change. And so, my work with Scroll by Choice, our team's work with Scroll by Choice is a lot about just that. It's helping people make change. It's about helping people recognize that there are ways to re-engineer your relationship with technology. You don't have to live with the engineering that was provided to you because that's the optimal engineering to inject, profit-making juice into you. Like you don't have to live with that. You have to live with an engineering that works for you. It is slowly bringing one organization at a time out of the matrix, helping them understand it. It's slow work, but again, I remain optimistic that we actually do care all collectively for a better future. So that's the work that we're doing.
Thank you once again, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll put links to the Scroll by Choice on the episode, and until next time, everybody.
Take care.